Good to go. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the November 10th meeting of Middlesex Center Council. This is an electronic meeting and it is 9:30, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. With respect to the agenda, there are no additions and I don't think there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest, so we can move to delegations, presentations, and petitions. We are having a presentation with respect to our DC charges, and Peter is on the line or not yet? There he is. Good morning, Peter. The meeting is, good morning. The floor is yours if you'd like to start your presentation.
Wonderful, thank you. I will do that. Let me just share my screen. And I believe we should be live.
Peter, just before you start, I have a little preamble with respect to the process a bit, just for the public. And
absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So there are members of the public that are participating virtually in today's public meeting. And the development charges bylaw, as they previously provided notice under the process to the municipal clerk in advance of the meeting. And those who have not formally registered will be given a chance to speak and provide comments, even though they're not registered previously at the end. Please be advised, though, that any comments and that you express or any written material that you're presenting is a matter of public record. And those who request to speak will be given 5 minutes to speak to council and provide comments on the applications. I'm going to ask council members for questions following the speakers. So in keeping with our procedural bylaw and our zone policy, I want to remind everyone that meeting participants should use respectful language and uphold our values of cooperation, trust, and openness. So again, Peter Sibsko is presenting on behalf of Watson Associates, and you can take it away now. Sorry for that, Peter.
Thank you. And I believe that the presentation is up on the screen. If I could just get confirmation of that.
It is.
Perfect. Thank you very much. All right. So good morning, everyone. This is a statutory public meeting required under the Development Charges Act. Municipalities are required to hold a public meeting prior to council's consideration of a development charges bylaw. And a related requirement is for a background study to be available on the municipal website at least 60 days prior to council's consideration of a development charges bylaw and at least 2 weeks prior to holding the public meeting itself. The background study underlying the proposed amending development charges bylaw for the municipality was published on October 15th of this year in order to meet those legislative requirements. The presentation this morning will provide a review of the proposed development charges, and then subsequently council will receive any public input relating to this matter. So firstly, to provide a little bit of background on the purpose of undertaking the Development Charge Update Study, the Development Charges Act recently underwent a number of amendments. And so the main purpose of the Development Charge Update Study is to bring the municipality's Development Charge Bylaw in alignment with the amended Development Charges Act. The changes were brought about through a few pieces of legislation, namely the More Homes, More Choice Act, as well as the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Act, and most recently one additional amendment through the Better for People, Smarter for Business Act. The main changes that have been brought about by the legislation and that we are addressing through this Development Charges Update Study are changes to the DC recoverable costs. More specifically, there has been the removal of a statutory 10% deduction that had to be observed for soft services previously, such as library and parks and recreation. There has also been a technical change that resulted in a slightly different treatment of growth-related studies, whereby these are now treated as a class of service. Then there have also been changes to the timing of calculation and collection of development charges. And finally, some changes to the statutory exemptions. The update study also addresses some updates to the capital cost estimates that were included in the calculation of the charges, which we will go through shortly. And then last but not least, the local service policy has also been updated as part of this process. All other aspects or components of the 2019 background study, as well as the existing development charge bylaw, which is bylaw 2019-073, remain unchanged. So next we will go through the changes that have had an impact on the DC eligible costs that are included in the calculation of the charge. We'll do that by service. So firstly, here we're looking at the table describing the changes that have been made to the capital cost estimates with respect to road services. There have been updates of capital cost estimates based on a current understanding of costs for a number of projects previously included in the development charges study. We've also added a share of the road surface conversions that were included and identified in the 2020 road needs study. Those road conversions being recommended as a result of increased traffic volumes resulting from growth. So those have been added to the capital needs within roads. And then we also added the costs related to the development of a master servicing plan, which will be a direct input into the next comprehensive update of the municipality's development charge background study. And you will see that that's a common thread between all the hard services. So we see that portion of that master servicing plan being included within roads. We see a portion of it included with water as well as wastewater. So in total then, the DC eligible costs within the roads area have increased by approximately $1.7 million, as you see at the bottom of slide 4 here. Next slide here, within the public works area, the capital cost estimate for the additional vehicles and equipment items that were previously included in the 2019 development charges study have changed slightly, and you'll see not a big impact, about $50 there. There were several additional vehicles and equipment items that were added this time, which are needed due to growth and expanded service capacity associated with that growth. We've also seen an update of the cost estimate for the new storage shed in Denfield. And so the net impact of these changes is that the DC recoverable costs within the public works area have increased by just under $255,000. Next, we have fire protection services. The main change here being the updated cost estimate for the additional aerial truck. However, that additional cost has been offset by the removal of a number of airbag items, which were previously included, as well as an increase in the post-period benefit deduction for additional facility space. And that adjustment in terms of that post-period benefit deduction had to be made because there is a cap on how much can be included in the charge. And that cap is based on the average level of service that has been provided over the past 10 years. And with fire services, the municipality was already at that maximum amount with the 2019 DC study. So any increase to the capital cost estimates do not impact the current charge. However, they may be recovered through future development charges. That's why it's called a post-period benefit. The next we have Parks and Recreation. Firstly, there was the removal of that 10% statutory deduction, which I mentioned earlier. Just to pause there for a moment, the 10% statutory deduction we had to observe previously meant that any growth-related capital costs that were identified as potentially to be included in the calculation of the development charge for services such as Parks and Recreation and library, for example, we had to then take 10% of those costs away and exclude them from the calculation of the charge. So effectively, municipalities were never recovering all of the full amount of the growth-related costs related to those soft service areas. And so that has now changed with the amendments to the Act, so that 10% statutory deduction being removed has brought back about $376,000 of growth-related capital, which was previously excluded because of that statutory deduction. There were some changes in terms of just revising the project descriptions for a project, which doesn't have an impact on the charge. But then there were also a number of additional park developments and equipment items that were identified since the 2019 DC study was prepared. And so adding those additional park developments and new equipment resulted in a net increase to the DC recoverable costs of just over $1 million. Within library, there's no net change because the removal of the 10% statutory deduction was offset by amounts that are available in development charge reserve funds that were collected from previous development charges. So again, no net impact within the library service. Within growth-related studies, we again saw the removal of the 10% statutory deduction for a number of the studies previously included. And then we also had several additional items that were added to the list of growth-related studies, including this DC bylaw amendment process, as well as adding the cost estimate for the 2028-2029 development charge background study update, and then the strategic or portion of the cost related to the strategic plan update as well. Within wastewater, the main impact is the cost estimate for the demolition of the old Kilworth wastewater treatment facility, which is directly related to the Kilworth pumping station, which is a growth-related project that was previously identified. However, we did include the or break out the cost of the demolition, which were not previously shown separately. As a result of the increase to the capital cost estimates for the various projects, and including the master servicing plan, as I mentioned earlier, we also updated the estimate of financing costs related to the DC eligible capital projects as well. So the net change or net increase to the DC eligible costs within wastewater is just under $1.1 million. And then finally, within water, the main drivers of the change are the inclusion of a couple of additional water main extension projects that have been included in the calculation of the charge, as well as, again, the updated estimate of the financing costs related to the DC recoverable capital costs, with the total net increase in the DC eligible capital costs being just under $800,000 within the water service area. So having gone through the details of the changes that have been made to the growth-related capital projects included in each respective service area, the next slide here provides an overall summary of the DC eligible costs that are included in the calculation of the charge as part of the update study. The total DC eligible costs across all of the service areas total approximately $58.2 million, as you see in the middle column of the table all the way at the bottom. And that is an increase of approximately $5.3 million, or about a 10% increase relative to the DC eligible costs that were included or identified in the 2019 development charges background study. And as we can see summarized in this table here, the most significant changes have occurred within the roads and related area, followed by parks and recreation, and then wastewater and water areas as well. So here on slide 13, you can see the full schedule of proposed development charges for different types of residential units and for different types of non-residential development as well. The total development charge applicable to a single detached or semi-detached dwelling within the urban serviced areas would be $25,697. And then the charges for different types of residential units are differentiated based on the average occupancy levels for those types of units. The charges for example, for an apartment unit, because apartments tend to have fewer occupants on average than a single detached home, so the charge for an apartment unit is correspondingly lower. And then on the far right-hand side of the table with the last three columns, the schedule also shows the calculated development charges per square meter of gross floor area for different types of non-residential development. So on the next slide here, we have a comparison of the charges that are currently in effect relative to those that have been calculated based on the changes I described earlier. The comparison is provided for development charges applicable for a single detached house, as we see in the first two columns of the table, and then per square meter of gross floor area for the different types of non-residential development as well. So the total development charges payable for a single detached house within the urban serviced areas are just over $23,000 per unit currently. and they would increase to $25,697 based on the changes presented earlier. So that's an increase of $2,673 per unit, or about a 11.6% increase relative to the charges that are currently in effect. The municipal development charges payable for a commercial development captured under this other non-residential column within the urban serviced areas are $69.37 per square meter currently, and they would increase to $76.90 per square meter based on the proposed changes. So that's an increase of $7.53 per square meter, or approximately an 11% increase relative to the charges that are currently in effect. On the far right-hand side of the table in the last two columns, we see a similar percentage increase for industrial development, but because the municipality's policy has been to charge industrial development at 40% of the rate applicable to other types of non-residential development, the applicable rate per square meter is correspondingly lower and would be $30.76 per square meter based on the proposed changes. And then finally, within the second last pair of columns within the table, because Council's policy decision in 2019 was to effectively freeze the development charges for agricultural uses at their 2019 level, that same direction has been maintained here with this amendment, so that the changes have been kept at $3.89 per square meter, which is the 2019 level, just adjusted for inflation in accordance with the development charges bylaw. So in this next section of the presentation, we will look at some comparisons of the municipality's current and proposed development charges and compare to the development charges in a number of comparator municipalities. For completeness, the comparison includes development charges imposed by upper tier municipalities where applicable, as indicated with the orange portion of the stacked bars, as well as school board development charges, again, where applicable, which is indicated with the green portion of the bars. So the first comparison graph here shows the charges payable for a single detached residential unit. And the gray arrow points to where the municipality is positioned relative to the comparator municipalities based on the charges that are currently in effect. And with the proposed increase of about $2,700 or $2,673 per unit, as mentioned earlier, that relative position would change slightly, as indicated with the teal arrow to the left. And this would place the municipality's development charge rates between the city of Brantford and the municipality of Strathroy-Caradoc to the left. The next comparison graph here shows the charges payable per square meter of gross floor area for commercial type developments, and with the increase of about $7.53 per square meter, the municipality's position would be maintained between the cities of Woodstock and Brantford. And then finally, the last graph here shows the charges payable per square meter of gross floor area for industrial type developments. And as mentioned earlier, the municipality has historically granted a partial exemption from payment of development charges to industrial development. And it is common practice to, in many municipalities across the province, to provide either full or partial exemptions for industrial development in particular. And since the exemption policies are not changing as a result of this amendment, the industrial developments will continue to pay a rate that is 40% of the commercial rate. And so the overall position of the municipality relative to those comparator municipalities would be maintained as it is currently. As mentioned earlier, we're going to actually, in this next section of the presentation, get into some of the policy areas. So having discussed the effect or the impacts on the calculated charges, again, we're going to focus on some of the policy areas now. And as mentioned earlier, one of the areas that is being addressed through this update study is the municipality's local service policy. The local service policy is a document that outlines in fairly general terms the size and nature of infrastructure that's included in the development charges background study versus infrastructure that is considered as a local service and paid for directly by developers and landowners pursuant to a development agreement or applicable approval process. So with that said, the municipality's existing local service policy that was contained within the 2019 development charges background study was updated to provide some refinements to the wording and just some clarifications of terms, so fairly minor refinements within the areas of roads and related water and wastewater. But something that was missing from the local service policy previously was a section related to more the parks and recreation side of things. So the municipality has put together a draft updated local service policy, which will cover parkland and recreational trails and other types of natural systems as well. We will be issuing an addendum to the update study containing the updated local service policy because it is something that was still being refined when the updated background study was released in October. So again, we're expecting to release that addendum sometime next week. So then in terms of other policies that more so pertain to the development charge bylaw itself, firstly, in terms of when and how development charges are applied. So under the municipality's current development charges bylaw, development charges are calculated and become payable at the time of building permit issuance. As a result of the recent amendments to the Act, there have been some changes here within this area, and these changes have actually been in effect since January 1st of last year. So the amending bylaw just provides some housekeeping to ensure alignment with the legislation. And so in terms of the changes we have seen is that for rental housing and institutional developments, the development charges will now be payable in 6 equal annual payments starting from the date of occupancy. And then similarly for non-profit housing, those types of developments will pay development charges in 21 equal annual payments. And again, that's starting from the date of occupancy. And then there has also been a change to how development charges are determined. If someone is coming forward for a building permit in relation to a development that previously went either through a site plan or a zoning bylaw amendment application, then the development charges are calculated based on the rates that were in effect at the time that the planning application was submitted. So again, that's in contrast to the current practice where if someone is coming forward for a building permit, the development charge is calculated based on the rates that are currently in effect. So now the development charges are frozen effectively in time for developments proceeding through site plan or zoning bylaw amendment applications. There is, however, a 2-year time limit on this, and that's applied from the time that the planning application was approved to the time of the building permit. And if the applicant doesn't come forward for a building permit within 2 years of the planning application being approved, then the clock resets and you are again charging them development charges based on the rates that are in effect at the time of the building permit. Municipalities have been given the ability to charge interest on the installment payments as well as on that DC rate freeze that I spoke about related to the 2 different types of planning applications. So the proposed amending development charge bylaw is referencing the municipality's development charges interest rate policy. And that is something that has been drafted and will be finalized before the amending development charges bylaw is passed. Within that development charges interest policy, it outlines how interest will be charged. It's proposed that the interest will be anchored to the non-residential construction price index, which is already a mechanism that's used to adjust development charges annually between bylaw updates. And the interest rate will be calculated based on the average annual change in that index over the preceding 5 years. Furthermore, the interest rates are proposed to be fixed throughout the duration of the freeze or the installment payment period, both to provide more certainty to the applicant and also to make the administration of that interest policy a little bit more manageable. And finally, there has been a change to the statutory exemptions related to additional dwelling units. The Act has historically provided exemptions for the creation of additional dwelling units within existing residential buildings. So for example, adding an accessory apartment in the basement or even an addition on top of an existing residential dwelling would not result in the payment of development charges. But with the changes brought about by the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Act, those exemptions have been extended to apply to the creation of additional dwelling units in structures that are ancillary to existing residential buildings. So for example, someone can create an accessory apartment above a detached garage, and they would not pay development charges on that new residential unit that's being created. And furthermore, for second dwelling units created within or ancillary to certain classes of new residential buildings are now exempt as well. So they've just expanded the statutory exemptions related to residential intensification and those secondary type units. So with that, that concludes the formal part of the presentation here. Just quickly here in terms of next steps, Council can now receive input from the public regarding the development charge update study, as well as the proposed amending development charge bylaw. We will be issuing the addendum to the background study, as I mentioned earlier, containing the updated local service policy. And again, I believe that's planned for next week. And then staff will be bringing forward the proposed development charge interest policy for council approval. And then finally, council will consider approval of the development charge update study and adoption of the amending development charge bylaw in about a month on December 15th. And I believe that the way it's been drafted is that the amendment would become effective immediately upon passage. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
And thank you for that. So the next step then is to move to the members of the public who have registered to speak. One, two, just one. Okay. So Mr. Jeff Fung is the member of the public who's registered to speak. We'll hear from him now.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
We can hear you. The floor is yours. I'll start the clock now on your 5 minutes.
Sounds good. I just have a question regarding the when the freezes happen on the DCs when it comes to applications that have gone through the site plan application or zoning amendment change. If the fee plus the interest is higher, results in a total cost higher than the current DC fee, would there be I guess relief from that total cost to the actual DC cost?
I'll ask Mr. Cisco to address that if he can. If not, then I'll be referring you to our specialists, staff specialists who would know the answer to that. Are you able to address that, Peter, or?
I think so. I can at least start, and then if there's more information we need to provide, we can do that in follow-up through staff. With respect to the DC free, so that particular scenario that was mentioned, where if the charge plus the interest would be more than the charge that's in effect at the time of the building permit, right? I think that's the question. Would there be an adjustment made accordingly? So that scenario hasn't been explicitly captured within the proposed development charge policy. I think because the interest rate that's going to be used to calculate interest being based on the non-residential construction price index, which is the same mechanism used to adjust development charges annually, it's unlikely that we would be in a situation where the development charge plus the interest would exceed the current development charges. But it is something that we can take away and see if that has been addressed in other policies, and to see if there is a way to maybe incorporate or reflect that kind of situation within the policy.
Okay, thank you for that. Did you have any further comments, Mr. Fung?
No, that was it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you then. We are virtual, so I'm going to ask if there are any members of the public that are attending the meeting virtually who would now like to comment on the application. If you would raise your hand feature and notify us, then we can see if anyone's there. No one's there. Okay, well, I'm now going to look to council. Are there any questions for Mr. Subsisco? Deputy Mayor Brennan.
To you, Madam Mayor, to Peter. Looking at the increase in residential DCs, is that the maximum amount we can increase it from 23 to 25,697? Is that the, you know, I realize there's a maximum amount we can go up every time we do this. Is that the maximum amount we can go up?
Through you, Mayor, yes, that's correct. The development charges study typically reflects it looks at all the growth related projects. It looks at the amount of growth that's anticipated within the municipality over the planning horizon. And then it calculates the maximum amount that could be recovered through development charges. And that's what's presented here. There can, by policy, be reductions to that amount, as we've discussed with respect to industrial development, for example. But in terms of what's proposed for residential, that charge of 25,697 is reflective of the maximum charge that could be imposed based on the capital projects that have been identified to date.
Thank you.
Very well, Councillor Heffernan.
Through the mayor to Peter. So in total, we've got $58 million worth of DC charges, potentially. Is that figure based on existing developments? So, you know, if you add up all the outstanding housing permits on those developments, is that where that total comes from?
So the total comes of roughly $58 million, as you noted, comes from an identification of the various capital projects that have been identified as being needed to service that future growth. In looking at that future growth, I apologize, I don't have the study in front of me right now, but I do believe in 2019 we looked at both a 10-year planning horizon for services like parks and recreation and library. So the capital needs that have been identified would serve to service that amount of growth identified for the next 10 years. And then I believe we looked at a longer term time frame for the harder services like roads, water and wastewater, which are typically planned for on a 20+ year time horizon. So again, the capital needs would be reflective of the servicing needs of that population and employment increment over the planning horizon.
Okay, so just throw something out there. So potentially, if the developers currently paid all the DC charges up front, then we would have that cash to then do these things without having to borrow or pay interest.
That's correct.
It's just a huge amount of money that growth is costing. So I'm just thinking of ways to save money. Obviously, they're not going to come up with 58 million, but it would be nice if they could come up with something to offset our borrowing challenges. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Arts.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Peter. When you're doing the calculations, what happens if there's something that's DC eligible that we decide we don't need, or a project that, like the Kilworth treatment plant at 785,000? What happens if it comes in at say 500,000, or the aerial fire truck we decide we can do without it? Where if that money was going there with DC, what happens, I guess?
So that those types of changes get updated or get captured typically through the comprehensive update of the development charge background study, which is done at least every 5 years. That's where we do a reconciliation of the reserve fund amounts. We look at the actual cost that projects came in. We look at whether anything needs to be taken off the list or added to the list. We look at what has been funded from development charges. And effectively what happens if a project that was previously we thought was required and maybe came in at a lower cost, I think was the example you used, or maybe was removed entirely, then there would have been some money collected towards that project, which is now sitting in the development charge reserve fund. And we would then take that and apply it against any future needs that have been identified. So it's a sort of self-correcting mechanism in that sense, is through doing the reserve fund reconciliation and recognizing the balances in the DC reserve funds and applying them against future capital needs. We correct for any of those types of changes that may have occurred in between bylaw updates.
Thank you.
Councillor Shipley, and then I'll go to Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to clarify on that, Peter, does the money stay in that exact fund then? If we cancel something, like let's say we do cancel that aerial truck, would it stay in the fire protection fund, or could we move it to another DC fund?
It would stay in the fire protection reserve fund.
Thank you.
And Councillor Scott?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, and good morning to all. I'm just not sure if this question's for Peter or for maybe Tiffany. So with the residential DC charges, I'm going to refer to probably Delaware and Arva. Part of the 26,000, there's 11,393 that is dedicated to wastewater. Now I know if with the official plan amendment, which we're not done, if it stays status quo and we do no growth and we don't provide services in the next 5 years, can we continue to collect that? Because I know it's been questioned to me in the past that we've been collecting that all along. And I'm sure like areas like Coldstream and that are not paying that portion of the DCs. Is that correct?
So I could take maybe a first stab at answering the question. I think certainly if there are changes to which areas are proposed to receive servicing through the official plan update, for example, then those changes would be made through the next update to reflect if an area is no longer being considered for servicing, then development charges for that service would not apply in that area. We are aware of the official plan update work that's being undertaken. Very closely related to that is the master servicing plan, which I mentioned a couple of times throughout the presentation, which is being planned for. So once the official plan is updated, the master servicing plan will then determine the hard infrastructure needs related to that growth, to the official plan targets. And then we are planning to do a comprehensive development charge update once that master servicing plan is completed, so that the development charge study can be both reflective of the updated growth forecasts, which are informed by the official plan update, and then for the areas that tend to comprise the biggest part of the charge being roads, water, and wastewater, to make sure that those are informed by recent master planning through the master servicing plan.
If I jump in there, really what we will see is similar to the charts that you present for the changes, project by project, line by line. That kind of change will go through in the next comprehensive study, allocating resources to specific projects in any new areas. Okay. Did you have a question, Councillor? No? Okay. Is there anyone else? Are you finished, Councillor Scott?
Yeah, actually, if I could.
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. If I could just add, so I think in case with Delaware, they've been charging these fees for infilling now back like 2008. So do we have a time limit, or can we keep charging these for the next 10 years and not provide the services, I guess, is my question. I know our intent is maybe to do that. So can we keep using that intent going forward for an endless amount of time?
So for now, yes, you can, if the intent based on previous planning studies is to service an area, then yes, you can use that. Those are the documents that, again, inform the development charge study. So you can continue to collect charges until that intent changes through an official document.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no other items, then I'll thank you for your presentation, Mr. Francisco, and Thank you for explaining everything and making the presentation, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Bye for now. We can now move on to the adoption of the minutes. The minutes for the Middlesex Center Council meeting held on October 27th. The motion is that we adopt those as printed. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Cates and Councillor Heffernan. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. We can now move to the consent agenda. These are items that are received in one motion, and council may request that one or more of these be removed for further action. Is there anything here that we wanted to pull out and speak to? Yes, go ahead, Deputy. Okay, take it away.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Scott or Justin, who's ever there. I'm a little alarmed at the rate of increase on this playground structures. You know, it wasn't that many years ago, and I've been around a while, so maybe it's been longer, but we used to get these playground equipments for 80, 90,000, and then they slightly went over 100,000, and now we're approaching 200,000. Is it simply the cost of doing business, or is there something changed in the way we build these structures that's causing this huge increase in these things?
Through the mayor, John, we've actually not changed the design all that much over the last couple of years. They've been a bit cookie cutter, to be honest. And as you know, in the past, as we've been doing over the last 2 to 3 years, we've broken up the project into 2 phases. First phase being the construction of the base, which does the drainage and the asphalt, curbing, benches, all that kind of good stuff. And then what's left is for the actual play structure, the fun stuff that sits above the ground. So we've kind of done it that way, and it's been successful, but we have noticed over the last couple of years, both the construction cost to install the base and the actual play structure itself, the prices have risen quite a bit. I'm assuming it's due to material increases and labor shortages and other things that are beyond our control, and sometimes out of the control of the contractor, to be honest. We're also facing, as you know, Denfield is still not completed yet, and that's due to material delays from the provider and the manufacturer, and we're still waiting on some of those items to come in. So that's what we're starting to see. Doing the last tender and request for proposals this past year did come in a little bit higher, which is why I've elevated that cost or identified that as a higher cost in 2022.
Head on.
Yeah, just to follow up to that. Is there a statutory law or recommendation that how often these things have to be replaced? Like, we seem to be replacing a lot of the stuff every 10 years. Is that really necessary, or can we extend that period by some time?
Through the mayor, well, most of our playgrounds, we have 12 play structures in total. Most of them are beyond 15 years old, some a little bit older. They were assessed in 2018, and at that by Play Check to give us do a bit of a triage and highlight to us which ones are more critical than others. And so we've been on the last couple of years, we have been on a renewal program for these assets. So that's why you're seeing them come up more often. We have been successful. Denfield was a successful grant through the Infrastructure Canada program. So thankfully that was paid for fully through that grant. We have another application in play right now with Trillium for Westbrook for next year. So hopefully we'll be successful for that. So we do try and take advantage of those grant situations. Eventually it will be at the end of our renewal cycle for these 12 play structures. And the intent is they should last, 15 plus years, maybe 15 to 20. And it all depends. Sometimes the legislation changes, CSA changes different things. They are in the elements, 24/7. So they do wear out over time.
Thank you.
You had another item?
Yeah, on vehicle capital replacement cost for vehicles. I guess I'll go to Rob on this one. Robert, do we go by year of the vehicle that we're replacing, or do we go by mileage on these vehicles? Or is it just the amount of repairs that's being done to a vehicle that triggers a replacement?
Thank you. Yeah, through the mayor to Deputy Brennan. It's kind of all of the above. The year is certainly the guideline that's in the fleet management policy, with the intended turnover, I think, is set at about 10 to 12 years, depending on the type of vehicle or equipment it is. But certainly we do look at, they're not always done in order. It just depending if one has a significantly higher mileage or we're seeing repair costs, and we take that into account when we're looking to do the replacements.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone else? I don't see any hands. In that case, I'll ask for a mover and seconder for the motion that item 6.1 through 6.6 listed on the consent agenda for November 10th, 2021 be adopted as recommended. Councillor Arts and Councillor Shipley, all in favor? And that is carried. Thank you, everyone. All righty, moving on to staff reports. We'll start with 7.1, and that is the fees and charges bylaw. So. And that's corporate services. Thank you, Tiffany.
Yeah, so through you, Mayor DeVete. So the report is in front of council, and there are 2 attachments to the report. So each year we do review our fees and charges, and the bylaw is approved before the start of the next year, so that staff and the public have a chance to take a look at what these new fees will be. It is important to note that all the changes happening from 2021 to 2022 are outlined in one of the attachments with an explanation as to why. And then the other attachment is actually the schedule to the bylaw that you'll be seeing for 2022. There are some changes that you will notice within 2022. Most relate to a construction price or a consumer price index increase, or increases to just cover the cost of the service, as well as to compare to other municipalities in the surrounding area. At this time, I'll open it up to council. If you have any questions, all of the directors and our managers or directors are on the call to answer any specific questions that are department specific.
Okay, super. Thank you for that. I'll look to council now for questions. Councillor Cates.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Tiffany. Is the late payment charge on water of 5%, is that what it always has been?
Yep. So through your Mayor DeVete, yes, that has. So the 5% is only on the current balance that is outstanding. It doesn't continue like our other interest does. So say if you're looking at property taxes, it's 1.25% per month. With the water, so water, wastewater, and storm, it's that 5% for that outstanding bill, and it's only that one charge. They will continue to get interest and penalties if it remains unpaid after the 60 days and then transfer to taxes, because then it becomes, it technically becomes part of your tax bill, and you'll get the interest and penalty charges associated with taxes, which is 1.25% per month.
Maybe not the time to ask, but I'm going to ask you because I see it on here. How often do people, because it happened to me last month, I paid it on time, but it didn't get through the bank on time, and I got this big overage, this big extra charge. And I realize it says the number of days on the bill. How often does that happen to people?
So through your Mayor DeVete, that does happen quite often. And so out of our policies, it does have to be in our bank account. So if you are paying online, we say at least 3 days. What happened, and might have been you recently, was in September with the Truth and Reconciliation Day. That was a banking holiday, and therefore that ended on the that month, like September 30th, which was the end of the month, which caused more people to miss than normal. And so, yeah, it is recommended that it's at least 3 days so that the money is in our account before we run the penalties and interest. There is one grace day. Unfortunately, many people didn't hit that as well, and that resulted in more interest and penalties than in the past, or on different months. However, it does happen. We do get some phone calls every month with respect to that.
Yeah, that would have been mine, September 30th. But yeah, it was maybe a little aggressive. But anyways, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Maybe I could just ask, what are the options that people have to pay?
Sure. Yeah. So through you, Mayor DeVete, there are different options. You can pay online through your bank. You can set this up a predetermined time. So if you always want to miss the end of the month, you could set it up on the 26th, the 27th, and automatically come out of your bank. You can also do pre-authorized payment with the municipality, and that would be where we would take it out of your account every month, what your bill is. And there is, you can pay in the office with a check. You can come in with cash, and those would be our main options at this point. And debit, obviously, when you're in the office.
And the person or the resident would be in receipt of the billing, so that they would know what the amount is in advance of the date of withdrawal.
Yes, all bills are out a specific time period before, at least 2 weeks, that they would have their invoices. We also do offer email invoicing, so you get it immediately as soon as the bills are issued. I know there has been some delays within our postal services in the last year or year and a half due to COVID. And so we do really recommend that people join the email billing. It does get your bill right away, and then you can store it electronically if you'd like.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions on the documents that we reviewed here? None? Councillor Scott? No. Okay. Well, if there are no more questions on that item, then we have a motion before us that reports CPS 53, 2021, fees and charges bylaw for 2022 be received, and that the fees for 2022 fees and charges bylaw be approved. And I'll look to Deputy Mayor Brennan and Councillor Scott. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you for that report, Tiffany. And the next report is yours as well, Delaware Hydro Reserve Fund. Do you want to take that away?
Yes, so through you, Mayor DeVete, the Delaware Hydro Reserve Fund, at this time, the Delaware Lions have requested an electronic sign be put up in front of the Delaware Fire Hall, and they have proposed to donate $2,000 to this new project. And staff have done the work with the Delaware Lions on determining 3 different quotes and getting some pricing on that electronic sign. The total cost would be around $40,000 that they are looking to have put up in Delaware. The projected funding source would be the Delaware Hydro Reserve Fund. However, this was discussed in our budget committee meetings, the last 2 meetings that we've had. And as a budget committee, we came back with a recommendation of not to proceed for the 2022 year. There are a few reasons why we are recommending that we don't proceed with the sign. One being that when we were looking at our capital assets for 2022, there was a significant amount that is required to be done based on the recommendations of our directors, which fall into 3 main categories. The first category is the asset management. So these were to replace and rehabilitate existing assets. This is a significant amount of our capital going into 2022 and beyond. As you know, we have a significant infrastructure gap that we are trying to fill, and that is a main strategic priority of not only the budget committee, but the municipality as a whole. We also then have our development related capital, and these are due to growth. And those are something that if the municipality has in our development charge study, and depending on the development agreements that are in place, many of these we are obligated to continue with these capital assets. And then the third being the efficiency related assets. So these actually fall under many different categories as well as growth and asset management. And it's just an efficiency related layer. So it's making it more efficient in the municipality, maybe improving our service levels. So those would be the third one. And so we found that the Delaware Lion sign at this point did not fall under any of those 3 categories. And then also one of the things that we wanted to keep in mind is we're concentrating on coming up with a new strategy or a strategy with relation to our communications. So although the electric sign can be a very effective communication tool, we want to ensure that we have a balanced strategy when it comes to communicating within the entire municipality. So although we could put up a sign in Delaware, that means that maybe we should be putting it up in other locations, or maybe we should be concentrating on different types of signs. And if we can have a more consistent approach going forward, rather than looking at things as a one-off, I think that would be more beneficial to our strategic direction as a municipality. And so at this time, we are recommending that we don't proceed. However, it doesn't mean that in the future this wouldn't be an option. It would be up to council at this point. When it comes to our capital budget presentation, it has been included as we are waiting on council's decision. So after this meeting, we will have it updated for the final presentation on December 8th. However, you will see it in the information you'll receive for November 24th as we are in the final stages there. Any questions?
Thank you for the report. I'll start with Deputy Mayor Brennan.
To you, Madam Mayor Tiffany. I understand why you don't want to proceed with this, but if I look at Illerton, I look at Arva, they have these electronic signs out in front of the fire halls. And there's a lot of information gets put on those signs about activities going on within the township or municipality, and local things that go on also to alert people. A lot of people don't look at the website of the township, don't know about things, but when they're driving by these signs, there's a lot of information on these signs that people pay attention to. So when there's really, you got Delaware down there with nothing else, like Coldstream here, we've got the sign of the township. So if there's anything really we want to put on, that's a possibility. But you know, I just think that I know the one in Arva and Illerton provide a real service to the community and letting them know what's going on around it. So although I understand why you don't want to proceed with this, I am somewhat disappointed that we don't have something down in Delaware to let the residents down there have a better understanding of what's going on. Thank you.
Other comments and input? Yes, Councillor Scott.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a comment also, I have reached out to one of the members of the Lions Club here, and I had some good discussions with Scott and Michael on this. And I can agree probably at this point that it's maybe premature, but I have kind of mentioned to them that, you know, that we certainly can still continue the talks on maybe how we can come about this in the future, because as Deputy Mayor Brennan states, I think it is a valid idea, and I think it will provide some advertising for the community since we're down at the south end. But I think at the same time, we need to look at all the aspects and then who's going to be in control of it and all that kind of stuff. So I think they're going to be okay, you know, with that, as long as we continue to look at further down the road at some options. I've talked to them and reached out to them about the Delaware Reserve Fund, the Hydro Fund, because I know they're thinking, hey, the money's sitting there, but again, we want to do it strategically and be smart about it. And so hopefully going forward in the future, we can come up with something that might include some sort of advertising or something along the way. So anyway, I will work with the Lions Club, you know, on some ideas, and also the community, if there's anything else that they're looking for as far as that reserve fund goes. And also if there is still some interest to carry on with this sign, we can certainly keep the discussion open, I hope. Thank you.
And thank you. Look to Councillor Cates.
Through you, Madam Mayor, just a couple of comments to add to what Deputy Mayor said. There's also one at the Wellness Center, the digital sign. But as a side note, I do agree with the, you know, having a community sort of sign that everybody drives by. I saw something recently about something in Park Hill. They must have a sign that everybody sort of reads on that going by. But as a side note, for if they Lions have their $2,000, maybe they could, I know the Shamoka Kilworth Optimist, they're in the process of ordering one of the signs, a brand new sign with the letters on it. And I don't think it was $2,000. So just as a side note, in the interim, if the Lions wanted to have their own sign, if they obviously can arrange to have the spot to put it, maybe that's an interim solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arts, please.
Through Madam Mayor to Tiffany, I was one of the counselors on the budget committee, and we had several questions on this. Like, it's on the fire hall, but who looks after it? If two people want the same information on and there's not enough room for one, like, there was a lot of variables in the cost of the sign, whether the Hydro Reserve Fund was really, the parameters were kind of questionable at what percent you're supposed to kick in. And then if we as a municipality owns this sign, like a $40,000 sign, a rock does a lot of damage to a $40,000. Like, it's the vandalism we're getting anymore. We'd prefer to have a more like overall plan, and maybe a sign that's not so expensive to replace, because our asset management man plan, someone says, oh, it's free. Yeah, it's free until you got to fix it. So I concur with Councillor Scott. There should be some further discussions, but right now things just didn't line up right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that input. I just have a quick question for you, Tiffany. Do you have any idea what the time, you mentioned that a communication strategy, is that something staff's planning for the near term? Do you know?
So through you, Mayor DeVete, so our communication specialist had completed in 2021 an internal communication strategy, and she has continued to work on a overall communication strategy. And I would expect something to council in say 2022. It is a joint effort, so we have our communication specialist will be taking the lead, but all directors and the CAO would also be involved, and then presented to council. So I would say stay tuned. And with respect to this specific project, what my recommendation would be is that we can keep it in the budget for 2023. So I'd say what we'll do is we'll keep it on there so that it's still top of mind for the staff and the community, and we'll take a look at those different options going into the 2023 year. This was, you will notice when you see the capital presentation on the 24th, that there is a significant amount of capital projects in 2022 and 2023, 2024, 2025, and 2026. And some of the strategies for the committee was to push things down the line to come up with a more robust strategy around, say, different efficiency projects, similar to what you, council received a report, I think last council or the council before, on converting gravel roads to tar and chip or asphalt roads. And that was something that, although the policy went forward, we have pushed any of those capital projects down the line to other years, as we do not have the financial capacity to do those at this time. So this could be something similar that we do push to 2023, and we take a bigger look at those communication strategies and determine what would be the best, knowing that we do have electronic signs in other communities. I'm not saying that it's a bad idea. Like I mentioned earlier, they can be very effective, and especially reaching our local residents, but it's just making sure that we have a plan in place and dealing with any of the concerns that Councilor Arts had mentioned with respect to who posts it, who takes priority, when is this happening, what happens if there's multiple groups, and that would be addressed in that communication strategy. You would have noticed a lot of that addressed in our social media policy that recently came forward with respect to what we post or what we retweet for the community and what would make it to our website. Something very similar would be in this communication strategy with respect to the electronic signs and what we'd be advertising, and that time limit and the time frame that would be around that.
Awesome. Thanks for all the detail. And as I say, you mentioned already that the criteria are there to evaluate our assets, and it didn't tick the box. And but obviously there's input from various people, and we know that we can have the conversation continue. So I think we've covered all the bases here. So the motion before us is that report CPS 54/2021 regarding the Delaware Hydro Reserve Fund, Delaware Lions sign request be received, and that the request for the use of the Delaware Hydro Reserve Fund for a new electronic sign in Delaware be denied. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Arts and Councillor Shipley, all in favor? And that carries. Thank you for that report too, Tiffany. All righty, next we have the CAO reporting on strategic plan progress for the current year.
Great, thank you, Madam Nadeem. To the mayor, members of council, before you is the first of many reports. I hope to report on the progress in relation to the strategic plan. Earlier this year, the municipality undertook the exercise to put in place a new strategic plan and a new vision for the municipality, and that was adopted in January. Since that time, all the departments have come together, and we've centralized our work plans to focus our attention to the 5 key priorities. And before you is the first report on the year 1 progress of the achievements that I'm happy to report to council and to the public. We've made a lot of strides and headway over the course of the year to accomplish some of the initiatives set out in the strategic plan. The initial couple of years is the continuation and progress of checking the boxes, so to speak. The game plan for myself and for the senior team is to then analyze and do more KPIs on the strategy and the initiatives that are identified as we continue to check the boxes and see projects come to completion. The other addition that I would add is that we have updated our performance work plans for the upcoming year as a result of our new strat plan. And everything is tied and geared to the strategic plan of the municipality. So we continue to make our municipality a progressive organization. And so I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. There is an appendix that our communication strategist has helped me with that identifies the objectives and the accomplishments that are broken down through the 5 different priorities. And so they're very high level as the initial intent of our strat plan. And we're going to just continue to build on the success from the first year.
Thank you for that report. I'm going to look to council for questions and comments. Deputy Mayor Brennan.
No question, just a comment that the amount that staff and Michael has accomplished since that's been passed is huge. And I'd just like to congratulate staff and Michael on their accomplishments up to date on that. It's very impressive of what you've accomplished.
And that doesn't even include all the COVID stuff. Oh. Yeah. So anyone else? I don't see any hands. No. Okay. I'm just seeing the little mark there and I'm going, is that a hand? Okay. Alrighty. So we do have a recommendation before us that report CAO number 30, 2021 regarding the strategic plan progress report year 1 be received for information. And I'll look for a mover. Deputy Mayor. Councillor Cates, thank you. And all in favor? And that is carried. Thank you very much. And now we have the development charge interest report. Susie, she disappeared though. She's back again. Okay, there you are. Do you want to tell us about development charges now?
So through you, Mayor DeVete, in front of you is a development charge interest policy. So before, when this occurred back in 2020, we did do a council report and a resolution on what interest we would be charging. At this point in time, we have not had any situation that has occurred that would incur interest. We do have some coming down the line that could happen. And so we wanted to clean this up within the policy as we were doing the amendment to our DCs right now. So one of the questions that came out earlier by Mr. Fung was with respect to the interest rate that we're charging and if that could exceed what the increase in the other DC charges would be. So if you're reading through the policy, I think that's actually a great question and something that we hadn't considered. So when you're looking through the policy, we are taking the 5-year. It'll be the average on the annual non-residential business construction price index calculated for the 5 years immediately preceding using the 3rd quarter index. So when a situation could happen that our interest rate would be higher than what our development charges would be indexed for each year would be if the construction price index went down. So if we're averaging it over 5 years and in 2022 or 2023, that construction price index decrease significantly, then the interest that we're being charged could be more than what we're indexing the rest of the development charges. And we did include that 5-year average in order to kind of smooth out those fluctuations. As you know, 2021 going into 2022, the construction price index is extremely high, higher than it has been in the many past years. And so we wanted that 5-year average to kind of smooth out those fluctuations. However, this could be one of those situations where if it does start to drop down, and it could happen in the future, that the interest they'll be paying is higher. So what I would recommend as a change to the policy would having a clause in there when we're talking about what the interest rate is, and have a clause that says not to exceed the current residential construction price index of the preceding year. So if the construction price index was only 4%, our interest turned out to be 5%, that we would adjust it down to the 4%. So that would be something that I would suggest. But at this point, we do have that policy in front of you. I can take it back and bring it back for November 24th with that adjustment in there, or depending on how James would like to proceed, if they want to do the adjustment in council.
And we've just chatted about, oh, sorry. And we've just chatted about that. Well, I'll look for questions first. If anyone has a question on the policy. I don't see any. So the clerk indicates that it's okay for me to say as amended with the clause that you've outlined, and then we can move from there. Okay, is everyone clear on what I'm saying? Just that bit that we just discussed or had presented would be added to this and we're good with it. Okay, so the motion before us is that report CPS 52-2021 development charge interest policy be received, and that the policy appended to the report and amended as described be approved. And I need a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Cates and Deputy Mayor Brennan, all in favor? And that is carried. Thank you for that report, Tiffany. And that takes us now to notices of motion. I haven't heard about any. And we have no correspondence. So I think I'll ask the Deputy Mayor to bring us up to date with respect to what's been going on at county.
Seemed like a long day yesterday, but wasn't a lot. We had a lot of in-camera sessions on different levels of things at the county, so that took up a large part of the day. During the council meeting, London Middlesex Paramedic Service is looking at redesigning their ambulances going forward. The whole fleet will eventually be redesigned by 2027. We didn't see pictures or anything, so I'm not exactly sure what the differences are going to be, but they are going to be, you're going to see in the near future some new ambulances with different designs. The county's undertaking a communication report strategy, and they did an RFP, and Boulevard Strategy Group has been hired to look into it, and the funding for that is coming from COVID funding. London Middlesex Paramedic Service is also moving their one station down to Simcoe Street, 180 to 182 Simcoe Street, to cover off downtown. It's a bigger building. It's a two-story building that we're leasing. They're going to be leasing with 5 bays deep, so it can actually hold 10 vehicles for future growth. And with the increased number of calls, this is why they're moving. They've rented the facility from York Developments at a cost of $26,400 a month for the next 20 years, with a couple of 5-year extensions to that. So that will keep the downtown area good coverage, and it is a busy station with all the calls they get. County is going with more electronic records and EMD systems. Nimble Services is looking after doing that. The third intake for municipal digital modernization is out. The county has 4 projects: housing affordability, emergency housing, rental housing, budget reports to council and the public, and Middlesex Library Services. Long-term care homes, there's a new act, and it's now going to be requiring 4 hours of direct care per patient per day. That is going to, result in a lot of cost increase. There's new inspections going to be taking place. They're going to be doubling the number of inspectors on long-term care homes. In the next 3.5 years, it's estimated that the nurse wage benefits, our wage budgets, will double because of the increased amount of care that people will be receiving. I think it's about 2.5 to 3 hours a day now, but it's going to go to 4 hours a day. So, the announcements yesterday, Mayor Allison Warwick from Thames Center and Deputy Mayor Brad Richards from Statutory Caradoc announced that they would be running for the warden's chair in the upcoming year. So that will take place December the 2nd at the inaugural meeting of County Council. So that's when the election will take place, and we wish them both luck, and we'll see where it goes. Thank you.
Any questions for Deputy Mayor Brennan? Councillor Heffernan.
I just want to make a comment. I know the government is planning to do 4 hours of care at long-term care home, and they have suggested that they're doing 2.5 to 3 hours. I would have my doubts based on my mom being in care about 2 years ago, and because they're short-staffed, everybody's friendly and do what they can, But really I would not say there's 3 hours of care. But anyway, that's just a comment.
Government has come out and is trying to mandate that each patient get 4 hours of direct care per day. Who's to say they're going to get 4 hours a day? I don't know how it's going to be monitored. Who's going to check and make sure each patient's getting 4 hours a day? But that is the recommendation from the government, and they are doubling the number of inspectors to inspect on this. But they can be in a long-term home for an hour, and they still don't know if each patient's getting 4 hours of care or not, one-on-one. So it's a rule, but who's enforcing, who knows?
Yeah, I'm aware that, yeah, that's the rule, but I remember talking to one of the PSWs at the time, and I said, oh, because I think this has been brought up before, at least 3 hours or 4, and I mentioned something to her, and she just kind of rolled her eyes, and she said, yep, okay.
All right, is anyone else wanting to comment on anything or ask about an item? Okay, in that case, thank you for that update, and we can now move into item 11, which is the closed session. The motion before us is that the Council for the Municipality of Middlesex Centre adjourned to closed session at 11:46 pursuant to Section 239(2) of Municipal Act 2001 as amended to discuss the following matters. Under Section A, the security of the property of the municipality or local board. Under Section B, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees. And under Section C, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board. Could I have a mover, please, and a seconder? Yes. What did I say? Oh, 11. It is 10:46. Yeah, there we go. Thank you for the correction. Pardon me. And seconder? Seconder? Councillor Cates? Okay, all in favor? And we'll